belongs to the world.
This is from the Ali movie, briefly showing his last speech. Not gonna.
Assalamu alaikum.
What you doing in my pockets, man? Get your hand out of my
Hold it,
pocket.
How many roads? Too many signs, I can't read them. Wouldn't recognize the turn even if I seen it. Been driving all along, feel like I'm dreaming. Okay.
Welcome to Street Apologist Live. I'm your host, Vocab Malone. How y'all doing? This is the show where we serve the underserved and look into the overlooked. And on the 60th anniversary of the assassination of the one called Malcolm X, we're going to discuss his life, his death from a Christian perspective, specifically a scholar. I have a scholar with me on today's program, Dr. Louis A. DeCaro, graduate of Westminster Theological Seminary and New York University. He also wrote On the Side of My People, A Religious Life of Malcolm X. Book's got great reviews. Just look at this one from the Library Journal, Dr. DeCaro's work on this issue. A fine appreciation of Malcolm X's life and work that not only shows him as a religious revolutionary, but clarifies his contribution in affirming the religious community in its glorious diversity. And this is a little blurb on the back. Despite his association with the Nation of Islam, Malcolm X had an intimate relationship with Christianity and Christians that influenced his personal life and spirituality as well as his career. That's the author, written many more books on John Brown as well. I put the link to the show we did with Dr. DeCaro in the description box. But right now we're going to talk about Malcolm X. Welcome to Street Apologist Live, Dr. Louis DeCaro.
Thank you, Vocab. Good to be with you. Good to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
So we got to meet in person recently.
Yes, we did. And a nice time we had.
I agree. So
yeah,
I happen to be in Harlem, and Dr. DeCaro, he's there in Manhattan. And believe it or not, everybody, if you pay any attention to urban apologetics, this next part of the story will probably make you laugh. Son Netta gave me a ride to Dr. DeCaro's house. So Son Netta is the one who tried me out. And I actually introduced them. We're even banding around the idea of Dr. DeCaro going on House of Consciousness. What would you think of that, ladies and gentlemen? We're going to find out. So tell us a little bit about your work, just sort of in relationship to X specifically, because I know you got a couple specialties, but talk a little bit about that, the work in relationship to X, then and now.
Well, let me start by saying now I really haven't been working in the life of Malcolm X now for quite some time, because I did segue 25 years ago into the work on John Brown, the abolitionist. Although, the depth of my experience and the passion that I felt in my work on Malcolm X, which started really 40 years ago and culminated with my doctoral work on the religious life of Malcolm X. And then from that, the books that I did started really in a different phase of my life, one which I fortunately had a lot of energy and was really trying in a very passionate way to follow Malcolm X. I went through, maybe, without getting too florid or lengthy, I went through a kind of cultural conversion that involved having to rethink my own upbringing and the racism of my culture and subculture. And Malcolm X was kind of waiting there for me as a figure that I found compelling, which was strange because I'm a Christian and he was a Muslim. But I also sensed
and you're Sicilian, for what that's worth.
well,
Well, part
yeah.
Sicilian, part Sicilian.
No, actually Neapolitan. Sorry.
Oh,
Little
you just corrected
Yeah.
me on that when we met. I keep on
Yeah.
saying that. Southern
Yeah.
Italian. There we go.
Yeah.
My bad.
But and brought up in the Italian Pentecostal Church, by the way. So, and even in that context, although it was not a rabidly racist experience, I grew up with that sense of alienation from Black people that was imbibed by Italian immigrants in order to become processed into the country. And I think it took a combination of things, but friends to help me engage in some self-critique to get ready to get to the place in my life where I could actually pursue Malcolm X. And it was not the autobiography of Malcolm X, which I read that and was greatly moved by it, but it was really a book that I bought on the streets of Greenwich Village one day in 1985, an old copy of Malcolm X Speaks. And I began to read the speeches of Malcolm X, and it was almost like I could hear him. I was so bowled over, so compelled by this man's life that I just determined that I began to study him, so much so that he actually wrecked my Ph.D. program. I was doing something in church history.
Malcolm X is still messing up the white man after all these years.
Yeah.
He's
And
coming in
thankfully
there.
so. Yeah, I actually had to take a master's and quit that PhD program, and then I restarted again, with the intention of doing a study on Malcolm's religious life. Because when I read the autobiography, what I noticed is there were some really interesting religious, quote unquote, spiritual features that nobody seemed to talk about because he's primarily was viewed as a political figure and as a quote unquote racial figure. But he also, of course, was a well-rounded human being, and he had a religious and spiritual background. And I wanted to explore that. And so, just to make a long story short, eventually I was able to sit at the table in 1991 with Malcolm X's older brother, Wilfred Little Shabazz. And it probably was the most important thing I could have done because I was able to find out about Malcolm's basic upbringing, what his family was really like in terms of religion and culture, where the autobiography is somewhat stylized, because all autobiography gets a little stylized, and so I learned those kinds of things, spending time with, and got a chance to meet another one of a couple of Malcolm X's brothers, a number of people who knew him, and so I was able to begin to cobble this idea of a religious life, and then was able to really develop that with the help of Paul Lee, who is without a doubt the preeminent scholar, not only of Malcolm X, but I think of classical Black nationalism and the whole African American experience. Scholars know Paul Lee, and so Paul Lee helped me immensely to get their sources together to do the religious life of Malcolm X. And so I did concentrate on that, primarily his two conversions. So his first conversion into the Nation of Islam, and then, of course, the second conversion into Sunni Islam after making the pilgrimage. And you guys seen the movie, so I don't need to talk more about it.
It almost sounds like you're saying good things about Malcolm X, but aren't you a committed conservative, maybe even classically Orthodox with a lowercase o Christian? How could you say anything good about Malcolm X?
Well, that's a good lead in. Well, first of all, Malcolm X is a man of truth, and of course, we believe that if something is true, God's hand is in it. God is sovereign not just over Christians; He's sovereign over all people, and God uses whom He will. I firmly believe, and I always have, since I first began to read Malcolm X, that God had raised him up for a purpose. And I don't want to put more into that than, I'm not suggesting more in terms of our doctrine of salvation. I'm simply saying that if God could raise Cyrus up, He has raised up many men and women in history to accomplish providential purposes. And I believe that Malcolm X was a man of God's providence.
What was the
And so,
purpose, Dr. D? What was the purpose, as far as you can estimate?
okay, one purpose would be he was raised up for black people. I would say that's the primary issue. Ossie Davis's famous eulogy said he was our shining black prince. Um, Malcolm X was in the tradition of another very important black figure who often is overlooked um, in our very narrow and stylized notions of black history that is handed down often. But Marcus Garvey, who was a Jamaican-born black nationalist. And really, what I would say is that Malcolm X brought the classical black nationalist tradition into the 20th century conflict with white supremacy, with racial injustice. Keep
But
in
hold
mind that
on.
there's another tradition.
Are you saying black nationalism could be considered a good thing?
I would definitely say so. In fact, I would consider myself a kind of, I can't call myself a black nationalist if you think that only a black person could be that way, but I certainly support the tenets of black nationalism insofar, and these are not religious tenets. These are political and social tenets, which have to do with black empowerment, black independence, black self-determination, and black internationalism. And by the way, what is often called Pan-Africanism, as I learned from Paul Lee, again, the eminent scholar, is that black nationalism, if you go back to the earliest black nationalists in this country, they were Christian ministers.
Yeah, I mean, I know Garvey. I think Garvey's the best example. Do you think Alexander Campbell, who was one of Du Bois' mentor? No, hold on. It was his last name Campbell. Hold on. I don't think his last name was Campbell. Alexander. I'm going to look it up, but he was one of Du Bois' mentors, and he wrote about him. He wrote about him thoroughly, and but he had a key goal of.
Are you thinking of McGuire? Are you talking about McGuire?
No, I'm going to look it up. He had a key goal of Christianization of Africa by people of African descent. But I'm going to look it up. But go ahead. So what would you? So you're saying that there's because usually when people hear black nationalists, I think they think separatism, the so-called. I understand. I don't think you're going to agree with the term, but in people's heads of certain varieties, they might think so-called reverse discrimination, bigotry. They might think that. I'm not saying that's right, but I'm saying some people think that. Other people might have a view that's like, well, my primary identity is a Christian, so yeah, I'm black, but the black nationalist thing, that's not what we're about. We're not trying to. There could be different ways that people could find to disagree with it. How are you finding a way to define it and then agree with it and then say Malcolm is sort of a good representation of that?
Well, first of all, black nationalism, could be expressed in different formats, including cultic formats that are unhealthy or that contain a measure of problematic teaching. Just like Christianity we could say Christianity has been abused, just like you could say other ideas, ideas are subject to abuse and appropriation. But again, when you go back to the 19th century, you have figures like Martin Delany and others who were Christians and who were simply saying that the experience of black people in the Americas, particularly in the United States, was such that racism was pervasive and the only real solution was for black people to be empowered. Black empowerment is important. Now, there are arguments about, does it mean going back to Africa? Does it mean staying and having a separate state? Or does it simply mean black empowerment? And there's not arguments that I'm even qualified to weigh in on, except to say that it's not a monolith. Black nationalism is essentially simply saying that you begin to solve the problems that black people face by concentrating on what black people think, what black people prioritize, and what black people need for themselves. You don't let outsiders set your agenda for what's good for you. And integrationism is good too. And as Christians, we also believe in integration. In a sense, we're attracted to it because integration means we can be together. And certainly the body of Christ is premised on the idea of breaking down walls.
Yes,
and reconciliation.
Dr. DeCaro. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah. I'll let you finish. I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were.
Yeah, just to say though, but black nationalism simply was simply saying that black people have the right, as those who are made in the image of God, or to have their own decisions and to control their own communities. And
Do you
that's sort of where Malcolm X was taking that
do you
position.
think maybe let's say I don't know about all this. I'm not saying someone would really say this, but they might say they might be. I'm a mainstream patriotic conservative American. Do you think, and I'm using mainstream within the mainstream of conservatism, maybe there could be a way to engender some greater understanding if we made rough parallels, and maybe you don't agree with this. I'm just with Americans' desires under the British colonial rule. I'm not saying exactly, but a sense of there's not the self-determination, and yet part of your labor is now. I'm not making like it's a parallel, but an exact parallel. But do you think maybe they might see? Okay, I can see. Maybe they can kind of understand this if we help them see through a different lens. I don't know.
Well, I think, honestly, I'll be frank, I think it's very difficult to get most white conservatives, and that includes white Christians, to simply understand that the black experience in this country was not an inconvenience. It was not simply that people were imposed upon for a short period of time, that the entire structure of the formation and development of the United States has always involved white people. And even that term, of course, I don't even believe in that term because, I'm Italian American. My forefathers knew nothing about being white. They came here and they were told they were white. Your forebears, the same thing.
Yeah.
White itself was a language that developed over against black people, over against non-European people to control them. So the problem with conservatives, and I grew up a conservative evangelical, I know how conservatives think, and I don't want to be judgmental because there are things in which we as Christians can say we believe in conservative values. To some respect, that's true. But at the same time, in this country, conservative Christians have always been the people who opposed any kind of progress, beginning with liberation and afterward for black people. Black people have always had to swim upstream, not only against white society's indifference or even opposition, but often to the white church's indifference and opposition. And so I don't know if I can convince any conservative that what Malcolm X had to offer is valuable to them. They tend to dismiss him and see him at best as somebody who maybe had something to say for black people, but certainly nothing as a critique of the country.
Well,
But I happen to believe that
I'm a
the nation-
conservative. I'm a conservative. You didn't have to convince me.
Yes. Well, when you say the thing is, when you say you're conservative, again, it's kind of like saying you're an evangelical, because many people have a concept of what it means to be an evangelical that I would say I'm not an evangelical if that means I have to be a right winger, if that means I have to be this or that. But theologically, I believe that the evangelical approach to theology, the classical one, the one that comes out of the Reformation, I would agree with that. So it's the same thing with conservative. There are black conservatives, and I'm not talking about the ones that are often kind of these people that you might see on YouTube that are just bashing Democrats, but in the sense that have always been black people who had conservative values, and yet I don't think any realistic commentary from either a black or a white person, a Christian or a non-Christian, that denies that racism is a pervasive and embedded issue in this country. It's a definitive issue in the country. And I think, again, that's why Malcolm X is so important, because Malcolm X was very clear about this. And he was as critical, actually, of Democrats and liberals as he was of conservatives. The famous analogy that Malcolm made was that there's the fox and there's the wolf. And he said the wolf is like the Republican Party in talking about in 1964, Barry Goldwater and the conservatives, and the wolf makes no mistake about wanting to eat you up. but watch out for the fox. The fox is the liberal Democrat. And the liberal Democrat, Malcolm X said, will get your vote and get your loyalty, and he will essentially eat you for dinner, because he'll never do for you what he will do for himself. And pardon me for saying this, but this is one of the reasons why many black people today have lost faith in the Democratic Party. I know that there was still a strong element because people were voting against Trump effectively, but the reality is a lot of black people today are really very tired of the Democratic Party, because frankly they put white people, white women, and other people's interests over theirs. Black people are always the last ones in the line, always the faces at the bottom of the well, like Derek Bell said. And this is what Malcolm X was saying. He was saying that 60, 70 years ago. He was saying, we can't wait anymore for white people to determine what's good for us.
Right. Well, I'm more comfortable, Dr. D, and, you and I, we talked about this a little bit. I'm more comfortable being described as a man of the right, for lack of a better word, than would you be, as well as the label evangelical, as long as I can define it properly. And my hope is, though, that more people that might have similar identification like that with me, they can, if they're watching this channel, I think they're interested in contextualized urban apologetics in some way. And I think it's better to have a greater understanding of a guy like X than to not. And I feel like there's these simple versions of him that I don't think help. And yes, it was 60 years ago that he was assassinated, but he's still relevant. He still matters. I mean, even within small little frames of pop culture, there was a show recently, The King of Harlem, with
yes,
with the mob and
Bumpy Johnson's story.
Yeah, that was the main element of it, Bumpy Johnson. And X was a key element in that series. Obviously an actor. Now I understand that wasn't a multi-million-dollar, production, yes, but not everyone in the world watched it. But I'm just saying he's still there in even small ways like that. There's still books being written about him. There's still discussion to be had, all that kind of stuff. And so here's what I'm saying, because if you're tuning in now, you could come from all kinds of different perspectives, and you guys may be feeling like, well, I don't know about what this guy's saying. Well, first of all, I love Dr. DeCaro. I don't agree with everything he says all the time. I'm not here to correct everything he says. I'm here to learn from him, and I feel like you should at least be exposed to different perspectives, y'all. And so I want to just have you be thinking today. And that's why the show up above the head, right up there, says asking questions 60 years after Malcolm X's death. So we're going to do like a Christian evaluation of X here and talk about some of those issues. Let me read a couple comments from the live chat, as well as give a massive shout out to our two super chatters. Wi-Fi Gospel, I got to meet you recently in Newark, New Jersey. Shout out to you, Wi-Fi, and thank you. And of course, Ellie down there in Florida. My goodness. That's probably one of the biggest super chats we've ever had on this channel in our entire life, brother. So I want to thank you very much for that, and it really helps and makes a big difference, seriously. So thank you for supporting the ministry of Street Apologist Live. If you guys want to join in with what Ellie just did, you could super chat or become a regular, patreon.com/vocab, because, Street Apologist is not just, I'm not the Street Apologist. The show is Street Apologist because I want to turn you guys into Street Apologists. But one thing I actually do in real life with some of you is go hit the street as apologists. So it's a different type of ministry, and part of the getting there is having conversations like this. So let's see a couple comments here. Dom says Malcolm X also knew white liberal racists were the enemies of black Americans. And Jay, I think he's a Hebrew Israelite. He says vocab is a devil man. How you doing? And we've also got, shout out to Nate holding it down. And then my man Carter, he mentioned it was Alexander Crummell. So that's the gentleman I was trying to do, and I couldn't get a hold of it. He actually, I think, graduated from Harvard. Pretty amazing guy. I don't think my phone's going to really let you see it, but there's the blurry image of Alexander Crummell, born in the 1890s. And then a couple other comments real quick here, and we're going to be moving on. We've got... Matamoro says, Dr. Lewis, spitting facts. Carter says, Malcolm and the NOI had many conservative values. Booker T inspired Garvey, Elijah Muhammad, etc. And here's what James says, and we're going to come down to this. And again, thank you for the super chat. Here's what James says. He says, he's right on that, talking about you. But was he a Christian? Well, I'm going to give it a short answer, then let's go from here. No, Malcolm X was not a Christian.
No.
But we can still say we believe God used him for a purpose, and we can also analyze in a unique way the role that Christianity played in his life. And that's actually what this book, Malcolm and the Cross, that's what a big part of what Dr. DeCaro does in this book. It's a very unique book. I really don't think you're going to find a book like this. So if you want one book of Malcolm X, this is the book to get, because he does it with the eye of a scholar, but also with the eye of a believer. Talk a little about Malcolm X's relationship to Christianity and how a Christian should view him.
Okay. Well, to start with, let me say this, just to bring home the point. Malcolm X was, in my estimation, if Christianity is not just a cultural identification, if it is a actual belief system, complete with both personal faith and doctrinal commitment, Malcolm X was never a Christian. So he will, in his presentations of his life, talk about coming from. He would characterize his parents as having been Christians. But again, I spent time with Wilfred Little, and Malcolm X's father was probably a traditional Baptist, but he was an activist. But as you know, he died when Malcolm X was very young. The most important person in Malcolm X's upbringing was his mother, Louisa Norton Little. And what was apparent to me, even though I had to read between the lines, was confirmed when I talked to Wilfred, that Louisa was not herself a Christian. She was an eclectic who believed that you made your own religion based on the parts of different religions that you found of value.
Sounds like a woman of the 21st century.
Yes. Yeah.
So you're saying that, yes, his father was a Baptist, but he passed early, and the primary spiritual influence as a younger man X would have had was on sort of an eclectic, what sometimes people call cafeteria religion. Pick some of this, put it on your plate. That was the main influence.
Yes. And what is key to his upbringing is that his mother, and he says this in the autobiography, he says, I never believed that Jesus was divine, was God. That's not an exact quote, but he says that exactly. And that was confirmed because Wilfred said that their mother taught them that Jesus was a prophet, that Jesus was not God. She was a Unitarian, not denominationally, but she was Unitarian. Okay. She borrowed from the Jehovah's Witness. She was heavily influenced by the Jehovah's Witness, by Watchtower Bible and Tract Society.
Wow.
And she was heavily influenced by dietary holiness ideas coming out of the Adventist movement.
Hold on. Did anyone even get this information before you? Like, I've read a lot about Malcolm X. I don't know. Was this kind of even known before you brought some of this stuff out?
No, and that was the grace of the work that the Lord gave me. When I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, I was paying attention to the religious themes and most of the writing. Now, remember, I was studying, and I came to publication in 1995. That's a long time ago. But up until that point, almost all of the writing, whether it was from Black people or white people or what have you, they were all focused on the issues of race and politics. And so, because I'm trained in this, I'm trained in history and theology, I was also interested in questions like, well, what kind of an upbringing did he have? What was he taught? What did he believe?
You went to Westminster.
I went to Westminster Theological Seminary. Yes.
To the chat, to those who don't know, Westminster is highly regarded for its academic standards, within the sort of evangelical intelligentsia, even people who are not Reformed. Westminster is a Presbyterian school. They respect Westminster historically for the sort of the level that the professors are and that they push the students and the work that they're required to do. And so, just so you guys know, that's a pretty epic place to go, Westminster. Did you have any classes with Van Til? You're probably too young for that.
He was alive. As a matter of fact, I met him. I'll tell you the story. I met him one day by then he was really starting to slip, but he came to speak at a chapel, And afterward, he was walking through Machin Hall, which is the main hall, dormitory and offices. And I met him. Here I was, a young guy, met him in this narrow hallway. Here comes Cornelius Van Til to me. And he had a catalog or a magazine rolled up in his hand. It's the only thing he ever said to me was, "Anybody who gets in my way, I kill."
What? That's what
I didn't know what else to say, and I walked on. So that was my encounter with Cornelius Van Til. Anybody who gets in my way, I kill. But he was, of course, he was joking. He was, because there we were in the little narrow hall.
So he had he had that old man humor.
He had that old man humor. Yeah, I'm fast approaching that old man humor myself.
You're on your way, but that's you got to write an article.
Yes.
The time Van Til threatened to murder me or something like that. Okay, I don't want to get too distracted, but that was a great story. That was worth the price of admission. Okay, so you're sitting down with his brother asking, because I don't know if people understood Little was Malcolm X's original name, just in case you guys don't know.
Yeah.
So he's talking to Little, if you guys heard the last name. He's talking to a member of the family, specifically the brother, and he's asking
the eldest brother, by the way.
Older brother. So he's the little big brother or something, or big little whatever. But so he's talking to him and asking him these questions that a lot of people probably haven't asked him before.
Yes. Yeah.
Fascinating.
And interestingly, when I walked into Wilfred's home, and I tell you, just a wonderful person, and the littles, were actually just very. And Malcolm X was by all accounts, and I've spoken to a good number of people who knew him. Nobody says anything different. He was a warm, engaging, kind-hearted, and very funny person. So all the image that was cultivated of this man, some of that was, at any rate, propaganda. But I sat with him and talked with him, asked him questions about the religious life, and he was very happy because nobody had approached him along those lines. And I learned about his family, his upbringing, and I learned how he was cultivated in what I would call a kind of heterodox, in terms of Christianity, a heterodox view of the Christian faith. And then when he went to prison, and you'll find this, in my work, but you'll find it in some other works, that when he did decide to do Bible study, he did Bible study with the Jehovah's Witnesses. That was intentional.
What?
So Malcolm X did not turn toward Baptists or Methodists or Presbyterians. He turned toward the Jehovah's Witness to do Bible study when he was in prison. This is before he was brought into the Nation of Islam. So his first inclination is to seek out Jehovah's Witness Bible study. Now, so what I'm saying is that for better and for worse, we are formatted in our childhood. And now on a positive side, that whole thing about I was ignorant and I didn't know how to read and I could barely write. And then Elijah Muhammad brought me. All of that is propaganda, because when he was writing the autobiography of Malcolm X, he was trying to effectively win his way back to the good graces of Elijah Muhammad, because when he was writing that book in 1962-63, he was facing a lot of opposition within the movement from Elijah's family. So his intention, in part, to write that book was to win favor with Elijah Muhammad again, to get back to where he was. Okay. And so he credited Elijah Muhammad with a lot of his development. The reality is, and Wilfred told me this, they were taught from the time they were children, reach for the dictionary yourself.
Fascinating. Yeah, even in the Spike Lee movie, it was kind of portrayed somewhat similar. Since you mentioned it, I have an old clip. This is from the Smithsonian. Hopefully they don't come after the channel. It's about 2 minutes. I'm going to play an old clip of X, and it's got some little commentary in here in relationship to the fallout with the NOI, because we're going to talk about this, because we are going to move on to the death, since it's been 60 years on the day. Yeah. So here, I'm going to play this clip right here that deals with that, and we'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen. Don't go anywhere. It's a very interesting clip with Dr. Louis DeCaro.
I'll excuse the fact that I'm out of breath, but about 10 or 15 minutes ago, a tragic thing, from all indications at this point, has happened in the city of Dallas.
We all was shocked at hearing of this tragic end of our president. We all were so shocked over the president, we just suspended all public speaking this year.
Malcolm X, you were involved in a controversy some months ago with your leader.
Well, I've been silent for the past 90 days because of some statements I made concerning the President of the United States, which were distorted.
They were distorted?
And yes.
What did you say, Malcolm?
Well, I said the same thing that everybody says, that his assassination was the result of the climate of hate. But only I said the chickens came home to roost, and which means the same thing.
You feel that we're making progress in this?
No. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. If you pull it all the way out, that's not progress. The progress is healing the wound that the blow made, and they haven't even begun to pull the knife out, much less try and heal the wound. They won't even admit the knife is there.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Street Apologists Live. I'm your host, Vocab Malone. We are talking about the death of Malcolm X from a Christian scholar's perspective here, and the scholar is Louis D. DeCaro from Manhattan, New York. Wrote some amazing books, too. One really getting into the spiritual life of Malcolm X, and another about his relationship to Christianity. And we are talking all kinds of things about his life and death. And I understand this a little bit different here, but let's continue on and check this out. Great stuff. Okay, so Dr. DeCaro, were you able to hear or see those clips?
Yes, I did.
So
always nice to see Malcolm.
Yeah, that's kind of where things went astray in a lot of ways. He said that the chickens have come home to roost in relationship to Kennedy's assassination, and he got suspended for that. And then at that point, it was basically the NOI versus Malcolm X. But he didn't want it to be that way, but it was going to be that way. Could you talk a little bit about that so we can understand the rift better?
Yeah. Well, the rift was, again, it had really already started insofar as he had enemies within Elijah Muhammad, who was the leader of the movement, his family, jealousies, resentments. And so this was already going on. And for the longest time, Elijah Muhammad really did hang on to Malcolm, that he said, according to one FBI transcript from a wiretap, that he said, I think very late in 1963, he said, he's my right arm. But he turned against him because he had a lot of family members whispering in his ears. He was always struggling, I think, with jealousy and envy because of Malcolm's charisma, his brilliant oratory, and the fact that many times, people were putting Malcolm X over against Martin Luther King, when in fact, officially, it was really Elijah Muhammad and Martin Luther King, because Malcolm X said he always said what Elijah told him to say, what he was bound to say, until this issue with Kennedy's assassination, which, by the way, didn't happen in his speech. It happened in the Q&A after the speech, in which he just cut loose. So there was some pushback on Malcolm. I think Malcolm was struggling with his own need to become an independent person, but he wasn't emotionally ready to let go either. And I would draw, and I have drawn, the parallel with those who are in cults. And those who are struggling to come out of cults go through a great deal of emotional upheaval, because really the Nation of Islam, and it's not my words, Malcolm himself said it in another wiretap it's found in Claiborne Carson's book on Malcolm X, that he said himself, looking back, that the Nation of Islam was a cult. And Wilfred Little confirmed that. He also affirmed to me that the Nation of Islam had been a cult. And cults have a way of playing havoc with the emotions and commitments of people. And it takes a great deal to break from that. Malcolm broke from that. Now, to my opinion, he didn't go. I wish he had gone toward Christ, but he went away from. He went into Islam, but at least he went into a religion that was, shall we say, at least a bona fide world religion, and that it helped him to clarify some of the ideas and thoughts that he was still carrying for a while when he was kicked out of the Nation of Islam. So when he did say that, he was silenced, but notice he was being interviewed. So Malcolm also, not only did he say what he wasn't supposed to say, but he also continued to do interviews. Not a lot, but he spoke to a number of different people. And he then went down to Florida with Muhammad Ali at his camp, and he was down there talking. And so Malcolm was really pushed. He was like a baby being born, and you can't stop this baby from pushing his way out. That's what I see as happening. So once he was really, even from the time he was silenced, there were people in the Nation of Islam who wanted to kill him.
Yeah.
And this is where
now,
it
hold
becomes
on.
very difficult.
So
Yes.
from everything, you're an expert. I'm just a guy interested. But from everything I've read and seen, that seems definitely true from multiple sources. But can you help us understand, first of all, why would you want to kill him? Why would they really, why the need to kill? And then maybe just one piece of evidence of how you know that's the fact that they did want to kill him. Help us a little bit there, because sometimes these are debated points. But real quick.
Okay. Well, in the sense of chain of events, in June of 1964, so Malcolm X was kicked out at late 63. Well, he was silenced in late 63. By March 64, he came to terms with the fact that he was never going to be taken back. There was already talk in the Nation of Islam to remove him. And so one of the things that the Nation of Islam did that really angered Malcolm was they tried to take his little house in Queens away from him, where he had a wife and daughters living.
Since you mentioned it, I have a clip on that. I wasn't going to interrupt you again. I'm so sorry, but you done mentioned it, and I've got the clip on that. So
let Malcolm speak for himself. He always speaks better when he's speaking. It's always better if he's speaking.
Okay, because now I feel like I got to play it, And so it's fascinating what you just said. So, any more context on this with the Queen's house before I play this clip here?
Well, they tried to take it from him, and when they tried to take it from him, he grabbed some heavy equipment, so to speak, and threw it back. And what he threw back was what he had learned about Elijah Muhammad having a lot of these babies with a lot of these young women in the movement, young women that he had sent to Elijah Muhammad to really train them and care for them, only to find out that this man took advantage of these young women sexually. And by the way, one of them was his own, I believe it was a niece who was mentally, she had some disabilities, and he still took advantage of her. This is the kind of man that Elijah Muhammad had proven to be.
Yeah, so I hope everyone sees, we can say some good things about X while saying lots of bad things about Elijah Muhammad and some bad things about NOI. And I'm putting it simply. And, from everything I've looked at, because I used to have a much more negative opinion of Malcolm X than I currently do. And part of it was just learning and reading. And from all the surveillance on him, it seemed like one thing that the government basically learned about him was he was a man of great integrity. Whether you disagreed or didn't like him or not, it seems like the FBI even understood, well, this is a guy who actually prizes virtue and walks the talk. Obviously, they're not going to agree with him. But it's like, and so some of his inner thoughts, in a way, we know because of all the surveillance on him. Fascinating. But let's play this clip about the Queen's house situation and what went down with that. Watch this, everyone.
And I had stated in a newspaper article about an effort to take my life back in January, and at that time the Muslims denied it.
Why are they threatening your life?
Well, primarily because they're afraid that I will tell the real reason that I'm out of the black Muslim movement, which I never told. I kept to myself. But the real reason is that Elijah Muhammad, the head of the movement, is the father of 8 children by 6 different teenage girls. 6 different teenage girls who were his private personal secretary. The one who first made me aware of this was Wallace Muhammad, Mr. Muhammad's son. And it was their fear that if I remained in the black Muslim movement, and this came into the knowledge of his followers, that they would leave him and follow me. A plan immediately was set in motion to take me down, put me out. And the statement that I made about Kennedy was used as a pretext to take me down.
Did you get out of the... What will you take to protect yourself from this threat?
I take no steps. I have a rifle. If anybody comes to my house without a good reason, I intend to try and use it, and that's all.
Deep stuff. Now you're really learning more about what's going on. And the reason why we're covering this topic, it's always going to be relevant to urban apologetics, which is what we do here in Street Apologists Live. But it's 60 years to the day. It's February 21st, 1965, when Malcolm X was assassinated there in New York City. And all the way from New York City, we have Dr. DeCaro talking. Heavy clips there. Heavy clips.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
And just what you were saying, too. Exactly what
and
you were
notice that he said, now that was June of 64. Notice that he said in January they tried to kill him. So that means right at the end of, after 1963 ended, he was still under discipline and they wanted to kill him. So, and then you said evidence. Well, first of all, what we also tend not to know about is the fact that Malcolm X, throughout 1964, in the summer of 64, after he made the pilgrimage, he came back in May, at the end of May in 64, and he was now declared as a Sunni Muslim. And during the summer of 64, a number of attempts were made on his life by Nation of Islam people. One of them took place in July of 64, right outside of his home, while his wife Betty was looking from the door. A Nation of Islam minister, who I believe is still alive today, God have mercy on his soul, tried to stab Malcolm X, and Malcolm was able to escape in his car. That was in Queens. There were attempts by the Nation of Islam to kill him in Detroit, in Chicago, and in Los Angeles. And these many times were bold-faced, sometimes even in the presence of or in the proximity of policemen. Because it wasn't that people were trying to protect him, but they didn't want stuff to happen when Malcolm was around. So police were stationed there. And these people tried to kill him repeatedly, and he was able to elude them. And so by the time February 21st, 1965 comes, this is no surprise. Malcolm X knew that the Nation of Islam wanted to kill him. And of course, they effectively were able to do that on this day 60 years ago.
And it's true that it seems the NYPD in some way was complicit with the murder. Your position, which I believe is the only historically justified position, is that Muslims out of Newark, New Jersey, that mosque of the NOI, I think it was Temple 25 maybe, I think that might have been what it was, are the ones who were responsible for his assassination. But the police and perhaps other factions of the government were purposefully lax. Can you talk a little bit about why you don't think the government did it?
Well, in simple terms, the government did not need to kill Malcolm X. That's why they didn't kill him. I'm not saying that the government wasn't happy he was killed. I'm saying that we have to understand that this is sort of like, I don't know if you remember from New Testament history, the theologian, and I'm not drawing a parallel between Malcolm X and Jesus, so Christians don't get uptight. But what I'm saying, looking at circumstances, F.F. Bruce once said that there was an unnatural alliance that came together to kill Jesus between the Herodians and the Pharisees. These were people who were enemies. Well, in a sense, what happens in the death of Malcolm X is a confluence of interests. The United States, the New York City Police Department, and the FBI. The CIA did not like Malcolm X. They didn't appreciate what he was saying abroad. The FBI and the police were against him. But what they realized was, in fact, there's a quote where one of the FBI documents, they say, "Let nature take her course."
Wait, hold on. That's a quote you're saying from an FBI internal doc that we've now able to see.
Let nature take her course.
Now, they tried to speed it up, didn't they, by writing fake letters, though?
Oh, yeah, they inflamed it. There's no doubt about it. So when I say that the Nation of Islam killed Malcolm X, I'm not saying the government and the New York City Police Department were not complicit. I'm simply saying that they had no need themselves to organize an assassination conspiracy or pull the trigger, because there were people who were quite ready, willing, and able to do it. And they just threw enough fuel on the fire and let that thing go. And then they didn't do anything to protect Malcolm or to do anything to even warn him. So are they guilty? I would say absolutely yes. But was Malcolm X killed in some conspiracy, the way, for instance, the African leader Patrice Lumumba was killed, who was a great African leader in African independence, and he was really killed through the conspiratorial work of the CIA. I think that's fairly well documented. Malcolm X was not killed in that way. Malcolm X was killed by Elijah Muhammad, and Elijah Muhammad turned against him, and there was sufficient animus and malice and murderous intent in the Nation of Islam, keeping in mind, too, that by 1965, the Nation of Islam had significantly transformed. Maybe the word, it was transmogrified. It had become something uglier. It wasn't this movement that Malcolm had stylized. It had become a place where there were criminals involved. There was criminal activity going on. Charles Kenyatta, who I knew, who was Malcolm's driver, told me that there was money laundering going on. Malcolm X himself said this as an independent leader. He said it was a criminal organization. Other people had been killed by the Nation of Islam before they killed Malcolm, and other people were killed after they killed Malcolm. So there is plenty of basis to see this. And furthermore, there is no evidence whatsoever that the FBI or the police did anything more than what we've already said: provocateurs, instigators, and then stand back and let it happen. The real killers, the real malicious people, were people who were part of the Nation of Islam and effectively, and I'm not saying this, as a matter of fact, let me hold up this book. This is an old version of the book.
Oh, wow.
By Baba Zak Kondo, one of the great scholars in the field of Malcolm X today. This book has been around for 30 years or more, but I think he's revising it. He's going to have a new issue. But look for this: Baba Zak Kondo, Conspiracies, Unraveling the Assassination of Malcolm X. I'm not saying these things because people may look at me and say, well, what people would say. I've learned from the best scholars of the assassination. And Baba Zak Kondo is the best scholar of the assassination. Paul Lee is the superlative scholar of Malcolm X. And it is clear. And Peter Goldman wrote a book called The Death and Life of Malcolm X in 1973. And a lot of times he was dismissed because his complexion. But Peter Goldman was a veteran journalist for Newsweek, and he was very well connected in New York City as a journalist. And he himself knew that this thing was primarily the work of the Nation of Islam. And that's what's so sad about what's going on today with Ilyasa Shabazz trying to bring a lawsuit with Ben Crump. He's a fine civil rights attorney. I got nothing against him, but he's wrong in trying to make this into a kind of super government conspiracy.
Real quick, I don't know if everyone understands the connection between Shabazz and Malcolm X.
Yes.
Just so they can understand what you mean by this current lawsuit.
Okay, I'm sorry. So the name Shabazz, of course, was a name that Malcolm X took. He was Malcolm X. In the Nation of Islam, most of the people, except for like celebrity people like Muhammad Ali, simply got an X, which represented the stolen legacy. But Malcolm picked up this name, Shabazz. He adopted this name, or even when he was in the Nation of Islam, he used it. He never legally changed his name to Shabazz, but that's the name that his brother Wilfred also used. Wilfred Little Shabazz, Betty Shabazz, Malcolm's late wife, took that name, and his daughters. So Ilyasa, who is one of Malcolm X's daughters, has recently, I'd say in the past year, I don't remember the details, has now a lawyer and is attempting to sue the United States government for having assassinated her father. And my argument is, at best, she could probably sue over what we've talked about, complicity, incitement, but no, it's not a case that can be won, because all the evidence shows that at the worst it was a complicit, a kind of a coming together of evil interests, but that the fist, the arm, the hammer that came down was clearly the Nation of Islam. And
specifically out of that Newark, New Jersey mosque.
Yes. The 5 shooters who came out of the Newark mosque. And by the way, it may be a coincidence, but on that Sunday, February 21st, Louis Farrakhan was at the Newark mosque.
Wait.
Now, he was scheduled to speak there, but he was there.
I never knew that.
Well,
you're saying the same Sunday Malcolm X was assassinated, Farrakhan was at the Newark mosque?
He was speaking at the Newark mosque that Sunday. Now, that may have been a coincidence, but, the little voice inside of me tells me, no, I think that there was something there. I don't think Farrakhan himself had anything to do. I'm not suggesting Farrakhan was a conspirator, but Farrakhan was a provocateur. He said this himself. He threw wood on the fire, and he talked against him. And so, you play in the mud and you get dirty. And so, yeah.
Wow. Truth Defenders in the chat says Farrakhan admitted in some way having fault in the murder of Malcolm. In an interview with Larry King, with Malcolm's daughter being right there, crazy, Farrakhan said, quote, "I may have been complicit in words that I spoke," and quote, "I acknowledge that and regret that any word that I have said caused the loss of life of a human being," concerning X's murder.
Yes, but now that's true. That was a public statement, but there's also footage of Farrakhan speaking in the closed, what should we say, sanctuary of the Nation of Islam meetings, in which he said, and this is on video. I don't have the information, but I've seen it many times, where he said, if the nation wants to deal with its traitors the way it wants to, what the hell business is that of yours?
Yeah.
So Farrakhan, when he's with the Nation of Islam people, he has no problem talking up Elijah Muhammad, the fiction of the greatness of this man, and also reveling or at least consenting to and affirming the death of Malcolm X at the hands of the Nation of Islam.
James Jones says in the live chat, 73, the NOI have tooling off heads. I think it's misspelled there, the autocorrect. Off heads in Newark, New Jersey for the men killing James Shabazz, the leader of Temple 25. Do you know anything about this?
I know that James Shabazz was killed, and I heard that he lost his head. Again, I haven't studied the Nation of Islam post-Malcolm, but I think that makes perfect sense.
And you also talked
remember,
about
this is a gangster organization. These people were gangsters. Not all of them. I'm sure there were very fine people in the Nation of Islam who meant well, but there was a real problem of criminality and violence, and it was not all. There may have been. We also know that there were cops. There were cops who infiltrated it. So, and the cops were not there to protect. They were there to incite and spy. Let's be very clear about this. Surveillance has never been used on Black organizations or brown organizations or even leftist organizations with the intention of helping people. They've done that for the purpose of destroying solidarity and inciting. But still, the people that we know, in fact, I don't say I know them by my name now, but they're on record, the 5 men who killed Malcolm X, including the man who wielded the shotgun that was the most lethal weapon. They were members. They were not police officers. They were not agents. They were Fruit of Islam. And by the way, that man who killed Malcolm X with the shotgun lived under the care and the acceptance of well, I don't want to say the entire community in Newark, but many people. He lived in Newark until the day he died. He never answered for his role in taking Malcolm X's life.
They covered that in that Netflix documentary.
Yes.
Yeah, it was real specific. Yeah. Now, I hate when interviewers insert themselves too much into a topic, but alas, here I go. So I was just in Newark, New Jersey last Friday, literally a week ago. A week ago, I was in Newark, New Jersey. And I was there for DebateCon and some other things, and that's why we were able to meet up Sunday in Manhattan. I'm talking to the audience, too, now here. And so I'm working on a miniature. When I say miniature, I mean like a 25-minute video, almost like a documentary on Edward Meredith Bibbins, the founder of One Westism. Now, this is an ideological term. This is not a term he would have used in his lifetime. That understanding of Hebrew Israelism, Abba Bivens, he's sometimes called incorrectly by his followers today, or followers of followers of followers, rather. Long story short, all the oral reports from followers of Bibbins say that he went into Newark, New Jersey to either street preach or to intentionally dialogue with Muslims of the NOI variety. And it was Muslims who came out of the Newark, New Jersey mosque who murdered him back in 1972. Now, it was a different type of a murder. It wasn't like an assassination. It seemed spontaneous, but they beat him so badly, and he was an older man at this time, that he later on died in the hospital of injuries. This is Abba Bivens. So it's a shocking thing to think that in some circle or spherical relationship, you have people within that sphere of influence who murdered Malcolm X under the same sphere of influence who about a little under a decade actually, later would murder the founder of One West style Hebrew Israelism. I went to that mosque. On Orange Street. Now it's part of the Warith, Warith Dean Muhammad community or something like that. But I was there, and it was a fascinating thing to be there. And when I told my camera crew, I was like, hey, these guys not only... Now, I'm not saying it was the same people, but I'm saying people influenced who came out of this mosque murdered Bivens and murdered Malcolm X. And they were like, whoa. Now, that doesn't mean they're like that today. Today they have a school there and all this kind of stuff. In fact, it's not even a Nation of Islam mosque. That's a different place now. It's sort of a Sunni quasi-Orthodox thing. But nonetheless, that's what happened. James Jones says the man who shot Malcolm X's name is William Bradley.
That's it.
James Jones also says in 1994, a NOI member have tried to shoot and kill Khalid Abdul Muhammad in California. We got some really informed people in the live chat, don't we?
Yes, they are very good. Yes, yeah. And there was an ex Nation of Islam leader in Washington D.C. who the Nation of Islam moved on him, and he wasn't home, but they came into his home and massacred his family. And if I'm not mistaken, they drowned a baby or an infant in a sink. This is the kind of people we're talking about, people that were given over to evil. And frankly, we're talking about people who were enabled to do that because, and this is my argument with the Nation of Islam is not its critique of white racism. I have no problem with that. My problem with the Nation of Islam is that if you're going to, shall we say, recalibrate religion and deny Scripture, you're going to create a vacuum in which Satan will move in. So, for instance, the Nation of Islam denies any life after death. I don't know if that's what Louis Farrakhan teaches today. I don't want to be disrespectful by calling him just by his last name. Louis Farrakhan, if he teaches that. But Elijah Muhammad taught that there was no life after death. So that's nihilism. He taught that there was no devil, there was no Satan, because white people were Satan. Now, I don't care if a black man thinks I'm the devil, because I know I'm not. But what bothers me as a Christian is the denial that Satan is real.
That's how you open up your book. And look, I know it's a little blurry, but I've actually got it highlighted. This is in the introduction.
Yeah.
And you literally start off the introduction. See, I be reading. It says, one of the least noticed aspects of the legacy of the Nation of Islam is that in calling white people the devil, belief in the metaphysical Satan is nullified. That's you. Right there.
Yep.
Had it
Apparently
already.
I haven't changed my mind over that. But yes, you're right. And so what do you do when you take the Bible away? Elijah Muhammad called the Bible the graveyard of my poor people. He took the Bible away from black people who followed him. He took the doctrine of eternal life, life after death, the resurrection from them. He said there was no devil except for the white man. When you drain these spiritual truths of Christianity, core Christianity, when you take away the deity of Jesus and you replace it with a man, and this is not even like Muhammad of world Islam. This is this little obscure man called Mr. Fuddud, and saying that he was God in person. So it is a kind of conglomeration of really, really bad teaching that when you rob people of teaching, you open the door for satanic influence. And this is what happened. Wilfred Little Shabazz told me that he said himself that he told his brother, if you continue to put Elijah Muhammad up so high, someday he's going to fall on you.
Fascinating.
And that's precisely what happened. You know, one of the things, and then I'll stop here to let you continue, but one of the things that Malcolm X talks about in the autobiography is that when he would try to get the audiences moved, particularly on the thing they call Savior's Day, February 26th, which is to celebrate W.D. Fard's birthday, this pseudo Christ, this pseudo God figure that's at the core of Nation of Islam teaching, but Malcolm X would call him the little lamb, and the people would be moved to call him the little lamb, the little lamb. Well, we as Christians take umbrage with that because there's only one Lamb of God.
Amen.
Who takes away the sins of the world. So
Amen.
What did Elijah Muhammad do? Yes, he did. In the beginning, he did some very constructive things for black people. I don't want to deny that, especially as being influenced by Marcus Garvey. But he was corrupted because he had no core of spiritual truth.
Yeah.
Malcolm X said in 1960 he got caught up in girls and in expensive clothes. And what took its place? We see this with Christian ministers, the corruption that comes in. But what happens when you don't even have an ethic that keeps you from killing your rivals?
Right.
This is what happens.
This is the mosque today. Now, technically, it's not the same building because the parking lot beside it is where you see it's there. It's on Orange in Newark, New Jersey. 191, 197 Cannon Street, but the parking lot beside it is where the actual building was. But it's a different group that owns it. But I was there last Friday, and there we go. So yeah, now February 21st, 1965, he goes into the Audubon Ballroom and he's assassinated. And what was the fallout of that event, of Malcolm X being assassinated at the time? What's the fallout of that?
Well, the immediate fallout was, of course, in a sense, strike the shepherd and the sheep scatter. There was a scattering. There was a retaliation, or at least what appeared to be retaliation, of a firebombing of the Nation of Islam Mosque number 7 where Malcolm had been, the leader. But beyond that, there was no, then the police came in and they arrested two Muslims that were not there because they wanted to get their arrests. They got two Muslims that were not present, and the one guy who was actually apprehended on site, and the three of them were tried and sent to prison for 25 years to life. And so, and that was it. Malcolm X was destroyed. And what, you could look at this thing from the standpoint of a people's history and struggle. I think that it perhaps was the greatest loss. And I know people are going to challenge me on this, but I think it was the greatest loss for not only for Black Americans, but for the global African diaspora from Africa. Because what Malcolm was doing abroad, we don't even have the beginnings of appreciating the ability of this man overseas to work in these emerging African independent nations. And he was developing, what he was really doing was, in a sense, replicating or reconstructing Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association of the 1900s. What he was doing was trying to build up African people everywhere and have African people, having Black people all over the world begin to organize and talk to each other and be mindful of what the West was doing. Now, again, I'm not anti-West completely, but if you look in history at what the West had done, what the European nations had done, and even what the United States did, tampering with, colonization and post-colonization and the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and the abuses that took place, Malcolm X was completely correct to want to see African societies enjoy their wealth, their own mineral wealth, their own rare earth commodities, instead of having the Europeans take them. And he wanted, of course, what he said, and it's the title of my first book, but he said, no matter what else, he said, I always be on the side of my people, because the Black American community historically has faced just the most awesome kinds of opposition, being a minority within a large white majority. And so he wanted to help the Black community, and he was willing to sit down with any Black leader, Christian, non-Christian, whatever they were, and began to work out a program that would help Black people generally. And by the way, he also wanted to recognize whites who were willing to work in their own communities to counteract racism and prejudice, and he would acknowledge them as allies. So the idea that Malcolm X hated white people is not true. It's just that Malcolm X felt that white people should not be all up in Black people's organizations and in their business. He felt that if you really are a white friend, you should be like John Brown, and he said it. And I'll say it again. If you want to,
Malcolm X
John
gave.
Brown,
Well, since you mentioned it, here's some of Dr. DeCaro's John Brown books. We got John Brown Emancipator with a very provocative cover image there. I had a friend who noticed this. I didn't actually even notice it. You got John Brown sitting on the Lincoln Memorial. And on the back, the ever-provocative blurb by the ever-provocative Dr. DeCaro says, the status quo has declared Lincoln the great emancipator and built him a temple in Washington, D.C. Yet Lincoln's role in liberation history is exaggerated, just as John Brown's role was skewed and denied in popular narratives. And then you got this one, some really great art. I mean, come on.
the same artist, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Same artist.
Yeah, this is good.
That's John Hendricks. He's a wonderful artist, actually very, very prominent illustrator these days. Yes.
Okay, yeah, this is good. John Brown, The Cost of Freedom. And my favorite John Brown book of yours, of course, is A Fire from the Midst of You, Religious Life of John Brown. So he said you should be like John Brown.
Yeah.
So Malcolm X like John Brown?
Yeah, I think he recognized him as, and so did Marcus Garvey. And as a matter of fact, there's a long history of Black appreciation for John Brown that comes right up into the 20th century. So, and this is about Malcolm, not John Brown. But But I think, in other words, for white Christians who want to be, people say allies these days, but for white Christians who want to be authentic, then the first thing we need to do is build relationships with our Black Christian brothers and sisters. Listen, don't talk to them. Don't tell them what they need to hear. Listen to what they say and what their experiences are. And then I would challenge you, read some Black history and educate yourself, if you haven't, as to how the Black experience has been defined in this country. And then I believe you will come with a spirit of humility and love, and we would actually be appreciated by somebody like Malcolm X, who would say, if you're a Christian, then simply be a Christian, but speak the truth. And I'm not afraid of Malcolm X the way some people are, because I know where I disagree with him as a Christian. I know that I don't agree with Islam, and I have good reasons for not believing in Islam. But that doesn't mean that the man is an invalid figure. It doesn't mean that I can just kick him out, because there are Christians on the right, sorry, vocab, I'm not talking about you, but conservative Christians who won't even accept Martin Luther King because his theology leaned left. And so for them to think even of considering any kind of value in Malcolm X suggests to me that they're not mature, and not spiritually mature or socially mature enough to recognize that the Black experience is real, that what Black people have to say about the history of this country and what they've gone through is real, and you have to read what they have to say and understand their position, and then you can appreciate why somebody like Malcolm X was so important, and why his death was such a grievous loss to the Black community.
Good stuff, Doc. I got another clip. This is when X was starting his own thing here. Just going back a little bit, right before his death, and I just got this clip where the news is asking him about this new organization. So I want you guys to see this so we can understand better what was going on right before his death here.
The new organization that you start affect politics? How much will you try to influence Negro votes in the coming election, let's say?
Well, we will not be a political organization, but as Muslims, we will be Muslims. I will try and teach the religion of Islam among the so-called Negroes and make them Muslims. But still, we will be flexible enough to speak out on issues that will make our people politically mature enough to be aware of the political power that they hold. In the present situation, most Negroes don't know the political power they hold. They don't realize that they can put the man in the White House or they can take the man out of the White House.
There have been frequent charges that the Black Muslims have preached hatred against whites. What will the attitude of the new organization be toward that?
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad has never taught any hatred against anybody. He teaches Black people to love each other and unity and harmony among our own people, and we'll teach the same thing. I will never teach anything any different from what I've learned from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Malcolm X, you've been very close to the new heavyweight champion, Cassius Clay. Do you expect that he might leave the Nation of Islam with you?
No. As I stated earlier today, it's not my intention to encourage any Muslim who follows the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to leave him. In fact, it's my intention to encourage all Muslims to remain under the spiritual guidance of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. That includes Cassius Clay.
I'm not surprised at him leaving us, but I'm surprised at what he said and what he hinted on. But I do think that Mr. Malcolm still believes in Islam. I don't think that his deviating from us means anything like the slowdown of progress of converts. I don't think that will hurt us at all.
Here on Street
Could I
Apologists
do a little-
Live today, we're discussing the death of Malcolm X. It's been 60 years since his death, and I have great assistance doing that, Dr. DeCaro, and I'm really interviewing him, obviously, as a subject matter expert in this area. And you want to comment on those clips, brother?
Yes, if I can, because I think that first thing we saw where Malcolm X was talking needs a little context. I call that brief period of time so he's kicked out of the Nation of Islam, and he really comes to terms with that. He announces his independence in March of '64, and then he makes a pilgrimage in April of '64. So in that brief period of time, I call it Malcolm in the middle. And what it is he's still processing what he wants to do and how he wants to do it. And so what he did was he opened a mosque called the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. And in the first phase of the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, he was really trying to be a satellite of Elijah Muhammad. He still wanted to kind of show that he was still part of that. And so he was still talking a lot. Like he said, I want to encourage people to follow the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. I'm not trying to take their followers. He was trying to prove that even outside of the movement, he was going to be faithful. But what happened was he not only went and made the pilgrimage, but he also went to Africa. By the time he came back in May, he had now come to clarity, and he understood that he couldn't do anything as Elijah Muhammad did. So he now was going to have a traditional Sunni mosque, and he also was going to form an organization that was very much like Marcus Garvey's organization, called the Organization of Afro-American Unity, the OAAU. And the OAAU was for all black people, regardless of religion or creed. They can join that. The Muslim mosque would be for Islam. So he had two organizations, and he was simultaneously trying to advance Islam in the United States among black Americans because he believed that was the way to start. He didn't want to stop with black Americans, but he believed that was the way to start. And then he wanted to start the OAAU, and there were Christians in that movement. There were all kinds of people, black people in that movement. And that was essentially a worldwide, it was intended to be an organization that would look to the needs and concerns of black people, regardless of political affiliation, religious affiliation, and so forth. So that little clip is interesting because he's in process. And like I said, it's Malcolm in the middle. He's not quite what you see when he comes back from the pilgrimage. And he's also he's not in the Nation of Islam either. So he's caught in the middle.
Right. That's a good way to put it. Live chat. If you have a question for Dr. Louis DeCaro, this is a great time to ask it. You put the Q with a colon and a question mark. It's the best way. If you have enough room, you can even at me in the question, at Vocab Malone, so I can see it. Help me out here. Let's take a look at our poll here. What's a biblical view of Malcolm X? That's the question I asked a little under 2 hours ago. What's a biblical view of Malcolm X? We have 1% who says, why should we care anyway? Now, I'm the one who put that as an option because I figured somebody would feel that way. But only 1%, the 1%ers, why should we care anyway? 18% say, what's a biblical view of Malcolm? All bad, hands down. 18% all bad. Then 32% say complicated and mixed. Complicated and mixed. What's a biblical view of Malcolm X? The largest amount of people say not sure yet, here to learn more. That's pretty good.
Yes, that's pretty good.
I mean, I think so. The majority, not the majority out of 100%, but as far as the leading number in the poll, most people say not sure yet, here to learn more. So looks like they're learning from you. Now I'm going to end the poll in a second, ladies and gentlemen, so you definitely want to get in on that. We've only got 2 super chatters today. Let's try to get our goal of 5. And what I said is, if I get 5 super chatters, I'll buy another book by Louis DeCaro. I'll buy the other Malcolm X book if you guys give me 5. Yeah. But you don't have much time, so let's take a look here at the live chat. Any questions or comments you guys want to drop? Soul Brother says this, Louis Farrakhan's presence has been a detriment to our communities. Look at Chicago, Illinois facts. Comment on that.
I'd say, I want to be honest. I'm not qualified to speak about Farrakhan's influence or lack of influence. I know that many Black Americans respect him for his candor and there are things that Farrakhan has said that I don't disagree with, but I don't know how I don't know the point there. I'm not denying it. I'm simply saying I don't feel qualified to address that.
All right. I'm totally unqualified, yet I'll go ahead and address it, even though the question isn't for me.
Okay.
Look, so Farrakhan has definitely made the NOI more stable than what it was or what it seemed like it was going to be. And I would, in my view, the NOI of 2025 is not the NOI of 65. And I say that basically in a positive way. However, I'm not just talking about some of the more media, noteworthy things. I mean, I've done shows on this. Type in the channel, Nation of Islam or Farrakhan. You'll see about half a dozen. In fact, one where I'm talking to an NOI member. What I would say is if you look at what he actually says, it's ultimately not helpful, and then NOI has severely underdelivered on their promises to the community. Yes, they did some good things, and I've seen them back in the Midwest doing some good things. It seems much less so these days, but lots of bad organizations can do some good things because they might have some good people in there, and I don't mean in a sense of the stark theological total depravity. I'm saying that people who mean well and are trying to help some other people in general. And I just think the NOI hasn't ultimately done that. And it's a shame that their influence has been as big as it has, in my view. So that's what I'm going to say. And let's go on here. We got James G. Did Malcolm X know about Islam's slave history, the Arab slave trade?
I believe he did, but I think that, first of all, there's two things going on. There is the converts' idealism, the wide-eyed nature, plus there was the fact that drawing an equation between what Western Christians did to Africans, compared that to slavery in Islam. I think you could argue in terms of sheer numbers and the nature of things. Well, it was awful. It wasn't anything compared to the transatlantic slave trade. But he was aware of it. But he was invested in a public discourse, and he wasn't about to say anything. Because if you look at Malcolm X's statements to the press after he makes the Hajj, they're so idealistic. It's sort of like, I don't know. Do you remember, Vocab? Do you remember the Promise Keepers?
I actually attended 2 Promise Keeper meetings in the 90s.
Okay.
So I definitely remember, yeah.
Yeah, imagine going to the Promise Keepers and saying, this is what Christianity looks like. And some people would say, well, that would be awful because there's no women there. But, men of every color together praying and singing and praising the Lord. Well, that's kind of what the Hajj is. That's what the pilgrimage is. It's a religious event.
The Hajj is the Islamic Promise Keepers.
Promise Keepers, that's right. It is. I mean, in a sense, it is, because people are at their best behavior. Of course, you sat and you drank and ate from the same plate with men with bluest of eyes and blondest of hair. Yeah, all that stuff is not false. But
by the way, real quick, audience, he's paraphrasing something X said in relationship to his Hajj experience. It's in case you don't know what he was paraphrasing. And it's funny. I don't know about Islamic Promise Keepers because Muhammad said that you could break your promises if it was convenient for you. But go ahead. Right. So you're saying it's sort of a best case scenario, and so he's seeing that. Yeah. So he's got this idealized version of Islam in his head.
Yeah. Well, his public discourse is idealized. What's interesting is that the time he was assassinated, he was writing to the Islamic Center, the director of the Islamic Center in Geneva, Switzerland. And in that letter that was in his typewriter, if I'm not mistaken, that he was actually challenging the Muslim leaders in the Muslim world about the, shall we say, hierarchy of where African Muslims were held as inferior, and he also was chiding them about how they treat women. And on their part, they were very conservative, and they were afraid of his ideas about blacks should defend themselves in the United States. So, like in most things, there's a public face, there's a public discourse that's not false, but it's also not the whole picture. Did he know about it? Of course he did. He even mentions a reference to a black man that he met who had been a slave and had just been recently emancipated. And if he read the hadiths, which I'm sure he did, well, then you're going to get a lot of stories about enslaved black people. So yes, but again, the argument in some ways it comes down to religious presupposition, and I hate to say it, bias. It's like, we always have to find Christianity as, Christianity is always wrong, and it's like number one, Christianity is always wrong. Number two, when Christianity is right, refer to rule number one. And in a sense, that's kind of the thing. Although toward the end of his life, Malcolm X did say in a speech, no religion is based on color. He did say that. But that's as much as I've ever seen that might be considered conciliatory.
Right. Carter Goodson says, I love Malcolm, just wish he would have got saved and believed the gospel.
Amen. Amen. And I have no reason. I've had some friends and people I've met over the years who were Christians who were just zealous and trying to argue that he could have been, he might have been, you don't know. Yes, but the fact of the matter is where Malcolm X was at the time he was so tragically assassinated, he couldn't have been any farther from the gospel in the sense that he did not believe in Christianity. He did not accept it. He did believe truly in traditional Islam. And unfortunately, we have to just leave him in the hands of God and the judgments of God. I don't put him in heaven. I know some Christian theologians who put Malcolm X in heaven. I can't do that theologically. But at the same time, God is the judge of all the earth, and he will do right.
Amen.
But Malcolm X was not a Christian. No.
James Cone might try to put him in heaven?
Well, yeah, James. I mean, yeah, I'm pretty sure that he probably, if he believed in heaven, I don't even know, honestly. But if
that's the thing, right there.
Yeah.
You met James Cone, right? You met James Cone.
Yeah, I knew him a little bit. Yeah, he's a wonderful man. We had dinner a couple of times, and he liked my first book, hated my second one. So that's what I
hated your second book.
He hated Malcolm and the Cross. Yes, despised it.
On your next book, you should have had a blurb that's one of those like James Cone, quote, hated it.
Yes. Well, you know what? I mean, I appreciate him. I don't want to seem like I'm scoffing. I just don't agree with his theological presuppositions, which I don't think were gospel oriented. I think, he had decided that the very center of his theology was liberation. And while I believe in liberation, the center of my theology is Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And that's what a Christian must adhere to. So,
where can people find your work these days besides at Amazon? Where else can they go, Dr. DeCaro?
That's a good question. Probably Amazon is the best place.
Don't forget about the podcast.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Well, that's right. The podcast, I do a podcast called John Brown Today. It's not Malcolm X Today, John Brown Today. So you can look that up, and wherever you get your podcasts, you can hear me going on and on and on. I'll give you you'll get a master's degree in John Brown studies by the time you listen all the way through.
Every time you drop a new episode, I think, this will be interesting, and it always is. Yeah. But I also think, clearly, Dr. DeCaro is not trying to make any friends. Clearly, he apparently has enough friends in his life. I guess he's reached his friend limit because every podcast, I just think he's not trying to make any new friends every time. That's what I think.
No.
Well, every time.
That's what happens when your heroes all get killed at the end of their lives. And all my heroes have always been the people that got executed. So, that kind of puts you in a precarious position as well.
Well, keep up the good work. And it was a pleasure to meet you. Everyone support his work. Subscribe to his podcast. And most of the time, the podcast might make you a little upset. Other times, it'll inspire you. But sometimes it's even cute, like the one where you talked about John Brown's pets, the cats and the dogs in the mix, and all that. That was kind of fun.
We try to do a little bit everything. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, guys, I'm gonna play one more clip from the Ali movie, and we're gonna close the show with this great picture of us hanging out there in Harlem. And thank you again. And I'm gonna jump to this, and then I just wish you guys a great night. Let me skip to this part right here. There we go. Right. Hold on just a second.
They killed Malcolm! They shot Malcolm! They shot Malcolm! They shot Malcolm!
And was hit 7 times in the chest and body and 1 in